Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our forum. I want to thank the Jerusalem Ethics Forum and the Galleon Foundation for making this possible. Welcome to our virtual viewers. Well, I guess you're real viewers. You're just here virtually for this great conversation, tracking bioethics, transparency, trust, and the industry's social imperatives. I am Jeremy Abbate, VP and publisher of Scientific American. And today I am joined by an esteemed panel of industry, academic, and journalistic experts to tackle this issue. Before I make a few introductory remarks around the topic, and before we delve into this in a very meaningful way, I would just like to introduce the folks that have graciously joined this conversation. First up is Dr. Jennifer Miller, assistant professor, Yale School of Medicine, and the founder of Bioethics International. Also, we are joined by Fred Guterl, author of the book, The Fate of the Species, former executive editor of Scientific American, and now the editorial director of a new project, actually a collaboration between Scientific American and BEI, something called Good Medicine, which we'll hear a little more about later. We'd love to also introduce Dr. Briggs Morrison, CEO of Syndax, biotech company. Also joining us, Dr. Joseph Ross, professor of medicine and public health, Yale School of Medicine. We are also pleased to have with us today Dr. Jessica Scott, head of R&D patient engagement at Takeda Pharmaceuticals. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Rob Scott, who is the retired chief medical officer at Abbvie. And as a retired person, you can speak off the record and with as much candor and transparency as we're going to need. So hoping everyone is comfortable, hoping everyone can hear me. And I am really, really pleased to be helping this discussion along today. You know, the public is always interested in health and in life science innovation. Humanity's war on disease is always a topic of much discussion among all stakeholders on this planet. But now, as the world remains in the grips of perhaps the most challenging health crisis in memory, I'd like to think that the public is following this industry and healthcare and the medical ecosystem and science like never before. So among the perhaps silver linings of the era in which we find ourselves, I hope is a better appreciation among the public for the rigor and the work that goes into medical innovation. And of course, from the crucible of health's most devastating hours comes a renewed commitment to collaboration, innovation, and an opportunity to win trust. Trust, of course, is built by long-term transparency and credibility. Trust is what makes us ultimately believe in our most valued institutions. And it is an essential component to good science, good governance, and yes, good business. Yet, for an industry whose mission is to improve the quality and the length of life, we see it ranking pretty low when it comes to trust. So I want to open up this discussion, which we're calling Tracking Bioethics, Transparency, Trust, and the Industry's Social Imperatives. I'd like to open it by letting each panelist quickly, with an opening statement, unpack this concept of trust from where you sit, from where each sits, how to measure it, how to track it. Why is it meaningful to what you do? I'd like to start with Jennifer. You initiated something a few years ago called the Good Pharma Scorecard, and its major mission was to track trust. You did it because you felt there was a lack of trust in obviously what is one of the most important industries on the planet. Can you talk a little bit about the concept of trust and how it relates to what you do and your vision there?
Sure, thanks, Jeremy. The Good Pharma Scorecard is actually an index that benchmarks pharmaceutical companies on their ethics performance using bioethics standards and metrics that we develop through a multi-stakeholder process. The scorecard aims to do three things, which are related to trust, but they're in some ways larger. The first one is to recognize where there are best practices within the sector. And the second is to catalyze reform where needed, and then to track progress year after year and communicate that to the public and other stakeholders. And we began developing the Good Pharma Scorecard chiefly for the very reason that you said, the massive levels of distrust in the pharmaceutical industry and the high number of documented ethics failures by companies in legal proceedings, media, and the scholarly literature, and a lack of clarity about, one, how prevalent cited scandals are in companies today. Are they outlier issues or rogue employees in an otherwise sound company or based on old data? But also a lack of clarity about what to do about the ethics and trust concerns, how to fix things, both the misperceptions as well as any genuine and current ethics problems. So we started the Good Pharma Scorecard to start setting standards and then benchmarking companies using those standards in an effort to improve trustworthiness and social responsibility.
Well, it's an incredible initiative and one that I'm quite familiar with, as we've collaborated now on a special series around bioethics. So we will hear more about that in our discussion. I want to throw it over to Briggs. How do we break down trust into its basic components? What is your perspective on this concept and how it's meaningful for this industry?
Thanks very much, Jeremy. So I actually began working with Jen many years ago because I was actually quite intrigued by the problem that she described and you described, which is this disconnect between the good work that the pharmaceutical industry does and its reputation. Again, the core mission of the industry is to invent medicines that will help people live longer and better. I guess arguably a quite noble and inspiring mission. And yet in survey after survey, people have a very negative view of the industry. And I think, put simply, the industry is not trusted. I think Jen and her team wanted to understand why and whether there were steps that could be taken to change that perception. So there is a conceptual model of trust that says trust can be broken down into three components: competence, honesty, and benevolence. So competence, the question is, does the public believe we actually can carry out our core mission? Do we in fact make medicines that improve people's lives? Honesty, there's a couple of things here. Are we reliable? Do we do what we say we will do? And are we credible? Do we actually tell people the truth? So for example, do we give doctors and patients all the information they need to make a decision about using our medicine? And as Jen pointed out, there are well-publicized cases where it appears we have not. We have withheld information. I think this is in part the issue in the news today concerning the COVID vaccine. Will patients and doctors get all of the information so they can know if the vaccine works and if it's safe? It's the basis for the Good Pharma Scorecard and efforts around transparency that Jen and other panel members will talk about. The third component is benevolence. Does the industry have the patient's best interest in mind? Or are we more self-motivated, or some might even say selfishly motivated? The opioid crisis is a case where the public perception is that the industry was selfishly motivated at the expense of millions of people. I'm the CEO of a biotechnology company. For many years, I held senior roles in global pharma companies, including Merck, Pfizer, and AstraZeneca. And you might ask, why does this matter to me? Well, I'm a doctor by training. I went into the industry because I believe deeply in its core mission. But if people don't trust the industry, they won't participate in our clinical trials, they won't use our products, and eventually nobody will invest in innovation. I think that would be devastating not only for us in contemporary society, but also for our children and grandchildren who will suffer from diseases for which we might have been able to find treatments. So I think society must have a favorable view of our industry, and we need to show measurable progress on the components of trust.
Well put. The stakes are very high for us solving this trust issue. I'd like to bring it over to Jessica. I know that, where the patient sits in this equation of trust in terms of the industry's commitment to making sure patients' voice is part of the discussion among the whole process of discovery and innovation. Can you talk a little bit about that, and certainly from where you sit and that the concept of trust?
I really like what Briggs has said about that we need to be competent, we need to be honest and credible and have benevolence. And I think we need to take it another step forward to demonstrate those principles, ethical principles, in how we behave. And let me share more about that. Trust and the patient experience is actually something that's quite personal to me. And it really started with my sister, who was diagnosed with osteosarcoma at age 16, and she died at 19. She participated in clinical trials and felt very much like a number, a nameless, faceless subject. She wasn't a partner, and she felt angry with her providers, powerless, as did my parents. She didn't survive, and I always wonder if she and my family, if we had been more supported and a part of a team, respected and empowered, trusting our team, the team to care and provide for our well-being, whether the outcome was successful or not. I feel this might have impacted her outcome, and it would have definitely helped her and our family cope through the process regardless. So I went to medical school not to cure cancer, but out of a deep sense of wanting to care for people and families through the onslaught of illness. Whole people, whole families. And when I got to medical school a few years later, it was in the first semester that I heard a presentation on what is family medicine. And I knew that that really spoke to me and resonated with my growing passion. And after practicing for over a decade in the middle of the economic shift in healthcare, seeing more patients in less time, I found that I couldn't talk with patients as much as I wanted to, other than about their presenting complaint. And for me, this meant that I couldn't be the kind of doctor that I wanted to be. This really led to my interest in having a broader impact to help fix what felt like a broken system. At policy level, change was clearly needed, and I went to law school realizing that I wanted to have a broader impact on fixing the system. And it was there that I realized I had a passion for collaboration and innovation to work on broader, complex challenges. And this here today is definitely one of those. I'm now inspired to bring this passion for helping patients as whole people and their families and care partners as our most important partners in clinical development. And what I'm seeing is that there's a real need and opportunity to do things differently. The current process for drug development is really unsustainable. It's too costly, it's too long, it doesn't adequately consider the needs of the end user, the patient, and doesn't even promote the trust patients need in the medicines that we're developing. So what I'm doing in my role at Takeda as head of R&D patient engagement is progressing a culture change, supporting a broader shift externally as well, in moving to partnering with patients in the process of drug development. And at its core, this means being open-minded to discover what we don't even know we don't know, which requires humility and empathy. Deep listening through two-way dialogue shows respect, affirms dignity, and encourages people to share what's truly important to them. As we open our doors to this kind of partnership, we're also building trust. We are seeing time and time again that many patient engagement activities that we're now conducting offer unique insights that we're gathering from patient advisors, which only these advisors are able to share because it's from their perspective and their own experience. Hugely impactful in helping us navigate toward developing more medicines of value to those in need. It's truly a win-win. It's a complex challenge that we're facing, and the benefit is for our patients and also for the ecosystem. So thank you. I look forward to this conversation.
Well, I would love to revisit the idea of a culture change. I've also certainly agree. I think we need more humility, not just in this industry, but perhaps humanity at large. And I want to thank you for sharing your personal story. I always marvel at personal stories and their ability to drive a professional mission. So thank you, Jessica. I'm going to toss this over to Joe. You know, Joe, you know the project we're doing because you were one of our authors. Trust as a function of how clinical trials are designed, how data is shared, how transparent science should be. I know these are things very near and dear to you, so would love your perhaps more academic perspective on trust as a fueler of the larger medical ecosystem and what we can do to help change that.
Thanks, Jeremy, and thanks for having me on the panel today. So I think it's important to think about trust broadly, which is that it has such a critical role across the entire healthcare ecosystem. Research is one key component of it, but as Jessica was noting, right, it has so much to do with the engagement with patients, between clinicians, trust among the teams and with the team. But in research itself, you know, I often look at this topic through three different lenses, both as a researcher, as a clinician, and as a sort of bigger picture, sort of policy thinker. And, you know, each step along the way, there are critical tenets that we have to meet, principles that we want to abide by in order to restore and strengthen trust in what we're doing. Because at the end of the day, we're doing research to improve care for patients, to make the healthcare system work better. And if we're not doing that, for what purpose is all this? And so, you know, as a researcher, you know, I'm a general internist. I'm a physician in training. I'm based at Yale, but the vast majority of my time is spent doing research. And, you know, when I think about the way to ensure that there's trust in the work that I'm doing, I think about, well, could someone know what I'm doing as I'm doing that? Am I being transparent about my methods, my proposed research? Have I clarified the steps I'm going to take to do it so that when someone looks at my finished product and they go back and look at it, do I share my research results so that people know and are aware of what I have found, regardless of whether my findings were positive or if they were negative? What, you know, is everything out there for the entire research community to see? And when I'm disseminating my research, am I even disseminating my data so that others could use it? Because, you know, every time we're taking a step, in research, we're investing, you know, can others use that data for other purposes? As a clinician, I want to be able to trust the entire research enterprise to know that all of the evidence that's been generated that could help me make a better decision for my patients is there and at my disposal. Some of that evidence, we don't only want access to the evidence that shows that something works or shows that something doesn't work or shows that something's not safe or safe. We want it all there so that, you know, as a clinician, you can trust that you're making the best decision for your patients. You can share that research with your patients in a way that's understandable to them. But then a big picture, sort of thinking about it for a policymaker or someone sitting in a professional organization making guideline recommendations, or as a journal editor, which is another role that I serve. You know, do you trust in the research itself? Was it done well? Was it conducted with integrity? Are all the results disseminated? So, you know, all of these aspects of the research enterprise, the more transparent they are, the more we can trust the process, the better the decisions we can make for patients. And so that's why it's so important.
Well, it's a great perspective, you know, science as a self-correcting entity. When you think about the spike in retractions in recent years, you know, the fundamental elements for people to have faith in this system, is to make sure it is as transparent as possible. So thanks for that perspective. We will grab onto that, cling on to that later as well. Rob, I want to throw it over to you. Without trust, the industry can't innovate, right? I mean, what do we need to do to gain the trust so we can have clinical trial participation and better engagement overall? Love to hear your
Jeremy,
perspective.
Yeah, you mentioned some important facts. Clinical trial participation brings benefit to patients. That's been shown through extensive experience. And it's for a variety of reasons that go beyond just selecting better patients, for instance. It has to do with the clinical care that's exerted in clinical trials. Research has shown that even patients who get placebo do better than the average patient in clinical care, showing that there's a benefit from participation itself. And generally speaking, a huge majority of clinical research is carried out in a very controlled way, adhering to principles we call GCP, or good clinical practice. And that GCP is overseen by a variety of stakeholders from diverse perspectives. The major feature, first and foremost, of GCP is to protect patient well-being in clinical trials. So it's very disturbing that a lot of patients won't avail themselves of clinical trial participation because they have a deep-seated distrust of pharma and pharma-sponsored clinical research. And this distrust, as other people have said, is slowing the rate at which we can bring new therapies to patients that really need them. So clearly, I and my pharma colleagues have done a bad job of creating that sense of trust. And we've done a bad job of educating patients about how clinical research is conducted, how their rights and well-being are protected. And so, we need more democratization of clinical research, making it more accessible to patients, not just the few that happen to live near an academic center. Jessica talked about using patients much more in the design and conduct of clinical trials. We need to invest more in terms of educating patients. The issue of communicating data, patients' individual data that we collect during clinical trials as soon as we possibly can without affecting clinical trial integrity, and certainly communicating the results of the study in a way that patients can understand, so that they can understand what is the value of their participation and have some pride in it. There's been a lot of progress made in this area, but much more is needed. As a society, we need to put in better safeguards for people's data privacy, because if people generally feel in their day-to-day lives that their data is being abused by lots of stakeholders, then how can they have trust in what's going on with their medical data? And as a society, we need to discourage our politicians from attacking those institutions that are protecting patients during clinical trials, like the FDA, when they do it purely for political expediency.
Well, that is a great summation of where what we also like to tackle. I mean, it's trust. The trust problem is an obstacle to innovation, and the patients and those that are performing these trials, it's not an us and them. If there are ways that we can meaningfully bring those entities together, it's perhaps a cliche, the idea that we're all in this together, but we are. And I think anything we can do to enhance that ethos in a meaningful way is going to help the industry. It's going to help healthcare. It's going to help the equitable delivery of healthcare. That is ultimately the goal of what the life science enterprise does. So thanks for the comments, Rob. Fred, I'm going to give you the closing opening statement. Ironic as that sounds, you are an author who writes about the problems of humanity and the solutions that we may embrace to fix them. And I've known you for many years, and you're a great guy, but this new role that you've taken on, you dug your heels into, or got down into the weeds of bioethics and industry trust while working on the project of good medicine. What surprised you around this topic? Just again, from a journalistic standpoint, whether it's public perception, this is a world that you were thrust into as a journalist. I'd love to hear your perspective on it.
Thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, this has been a fun project. And I guess I'd like to step back a little bit and just talk a little bit about really that this whole issue of trust is a much larger problem than what we're dealing with here. It's a problem that society is grappling with. The public has had a growing distrust for government, for journalists, for capitalism, for big pharma, and this has been happening for a long time. Scientists have always scored near the top of the trust scale, but lately even their credibility has been undermined, like as we can see with climate change and vaccines. And now during a pandemic, we have political leaders who are undermining the independence of the FDA and the CDC and other vital institutions, and even facts. We don't really trust facts anymore, which I suppose we have the internet to thank for that, and particularly social media, for providing a platform for spreading conspiracy theories and disinformation. And so this is a crisis that extends to all spheres of our lives. I think in this chaotic information environment, I think good medicine and the work of Bioethics International makes that work just so much more important. And I think what we've tried to do with good medicine is present present important informations in medicine and medical research as the complex, multifaceted problems that they are, problems that are not easy to solve. And we've tried to do the difficult work of offering constructive solutions from some of the scientists and bioethicists who've done some deep thinking on the subject. So we have Joe Ross on how scientists are working to share data and make research more efficient and transparent, and Carrie Gross on how technology could offer ways of gathering real world data to better inform the risks of drugs, and Michelle Mello on how to keep research on coronavirus that's disseminated quickly, but not in a way that misinforms the public. And so, for each one of these issues, we kind of roll up our sleeves and define the problem and explain what the issues are and offer specific solutions. And as to what has surprised me about it, there's an element of surprise in every story we do, and that's as it should be. If I'm not surprised by something in every story, then we're not moving the needle forward. I didn't know, for example, that the tide of opinion has been turning in favor of including pregnant women in drug testing. I was surprised. I didn't realize the extent to which Africans are concerned about being exploited in genomic research. But I think the thing that most surprised me about this project was the Good Pharma scorecard. I've always thought that laws and regulations are the best tools available for making change, but the notion that a simple behavioral intervention like a ranking could change the practices of pharmaceutical companies, that was a real eye-opener for me.
Well, rankings do matter, and from the U.S. News and World Report hospital ranking to something that I developed years ago called the Scientific American Worldview, which was a scorecard of nations and how well they are poised to innovate and take advantage of the tools of innovation in the life sciences. I'm always fascinated by lists and rankings, but certainly what BEI has done is really focus that on an industry and not in a punitive way. I think in a very constructive way. So Thanks, Fred, for those comments. I'm going to actually bring it back over to Jennifer, and I want to certainly have a cross-pollinated discussion. So I may call on people. I may sometimes let people chime in when they want to. So I would love to kind of set off this group chat around, you know, this idea that ethics, social responsibility, patient centricity. There's a lot of lip service about it. Certainly, gets talked about a lot. But you know, we're here to see how meaningful it can be, and how we can make sure we track it better, benchmark it better, prioritize. You know, what are the, again, forgive the cliche, the low-hanging fruit with what we can do better. You know, are we? And I'm going to ask Jennifer first. You know, you spend a lot of your mental energy thinking about what we need to track and how we can track things better. You know, are we tracking the right things? What is the next evolution when it comes to the metrics that we need to be focused on so that we can really have a view of, you know, again, this, where the trajectory of trust is going and how the industry can constantly improve, and, you know, how from, you know, what would you like to do as you evolve this amazing initiative that you started so many years ago?
So I echo what pretty much everyone already stated so well, is that society and patients have this question of, you know, does the pharmaceutical sector, and quite frankly, large institutions in general, from banks to the FDA, have our interests at the heart of what they're doing? And do they value a long-term going relationship with us? And us is a very tough word because we're not monolithic, right, in any sense. And so working on is, are the interests of stakeholders within the pharmaceutical sector, whether it's patients and research participants, as well as companies, and where are their alignments and where are there risks for misalignments, and how are we going to handle the misalignments and be very transparent about what we can and cannot do. And so what I've figured out in, you know, my humble research is that there's 5 areas that are very critical to stakeholders in terms of ethics and social responsibility and patient centricity. And within these 5 categories, there are a myriad of specific concerns. But generally, you can think about important areas are, one, around how clinical trials are designed. Here, what's very salient is demographic inclusion and representation, right? People are very concerned that when they see clinical research, it tends to be conducted with healthier, younger, whiter, more often male patients than a typical patient. And as Fred mentioned, pregnant and lactating women are, for many reasons, often not included. Secondly, they're also concerned about how clinical trials are actually conducted in the US, but around the world. We're increasing, most of our trials are now done outside of the US, even trials supporting FDA drug approvals. And here there are questions about exploitation and, you know, are trials we're conducting in developing countries responsive to their needs, or are they responsive to first world needs, like male pattern baldness drugs rather than TB drugs? Thirdly, there are concerns about transparency, and this is very salient right now, right? Do pharma companies communicate the results of all clinical trials and share data, or is there some selective reporting biased towards making drugs look safer and more effective than they really are to sell more products? I'm just telling you, these are the perceptions that stakeholders have. I'm not putting any weight behind them necessarily. And then finally, there are concerns around the relationship of the industry with various stakeholders, conflicts of interest, right, where we want to engage patients in the research process, like Jessica Scott said, but what happens when we start paying certain patients for their input? You know, can they be captured? Does that conflict pose any risks to their integrity of the feedback? And ultimately, the accessibility of medicines, right? A lot of people cannot afford the medicines that are being produced. And, you know, what can we do about that? What should we do about that? And what are the factors that are at play there? Anti-competitive practices and various things. So it's a high level look at some of the key ethics issues that I think are important to address.
Yeah, I mean, that's the, you know, gets to the heart of how we move forward. I mean, I want to echo what you said first in your comments. You know, does the public think that this entity, this industry has its best interest at heart. I mean, it's the fundamental question of trust. It's something, to echo Fred, it's bigger than just the life science and health industry. It's in general. And you could argue I've always wrestled with the idea that, certainly in America and some other countries, healthcare is both, it's a right, obviously, it is a business. When done correctly, it's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, obviously we incentivize this and industry can scale innovation. But of course, everyone is always going to question best interest, particularly when it is a for-profit entity. But as such, it makes the hurdles, I think, harder. So I want to maybe throw it over back to Rob. Some fundamental things to track and benchmark so that we can make sure that the public does feel like, okay, there's always going to be some type of scam. I mean, no industry, no entity is flawless. But how can we better try and make clear? Yes, your best interests are what the interests are of this enterprise.
As much as I said, there are multiple benefits to clinical trial participation that applies to people in pharma, key opinion leaders, physicians in research. And many of those benefits aren't financial in nature. So it's difficult to get some of the perverse incentives out of the system, right? You may not pay a key opinion leader anything to participate in a clinical trial, but he gets benefit from publications and from the ability to talk about it. So it's very difficult to do. I think institutions like Bioethics International do two things. First of all, they discourage bad behavior by rating people who are not performing well, right? And they encourage good behavior by rating people who are trying well as well. The problem is I don't think that that's necessarily all that obvious to patients who are not going to look at the Good Pharma scorecard. Maybe the industry has to self-regulate itself. We do have forums, we have industry organizations that have a set of principles that most people would agree are good and promote good ethics. But I think there needs to be more done to stop people who are either not part of those forums or who are not following those principles to create some sort of sanctions against those people, because it's bad for all of us. It's bad for people in the industry.
Absolutely, and maybe just throw it quickly over to Jessica, because I mentioned you hear a lot about patient-centric medicine, and it became somewhat of an in vogue term, but there is this perception that in many cases it's lip service. It's not a meaningful component to how we innovate and how the ecosystem should be structured. Again, you're very close to this issue. What do you feel? Is it becoming more real, and can the industry communicate that better?
Yeah, great question. It is becoming more real. I think it has a ways to go, depending on the organization, and models like we've been able to adopt at Takeda, where we are showing the implementation of patient engagement and what we're actually doing, rather than kind of a nebulous, gauzy value of being patient focused. And by that, I mean, we've implemented a progressive set of KPIs to change the culture, where we've moved over the course of 3 years to having last year a patient engagement activity for every global program team with clinical development going on, so that we have those experiences of insights that can be gained, and that begins to self-seed as a culture within the organization. And by the end of this year, every global program team that's in the same scope, but having active in clinical trials, will have a patient engagement plan, which is a proactive roadmap for how we'll engage with patients and the patient community in the development of that asset. So we have these tangible insights that we're gaining. We've committed through the key performance indicators, so that that demonstrates commitment and demonstrates that we are doing something, not just saying something. But in thinking about the Good Pharma Scorecard, I want to go back to what Jen was talking about and the 5 categories that she's mentioned. When I was at GSK formerly, we were real leaders and still are at GSK in building trust through transparency, clinical trial transparency. And I had the honor of really being at the forefront of developing plain language summaries for the broader public about the clinical trial results, and progressing with the individual return of results to trial participants. And I had the opportunity to move to Takeda to progress the patient centricity and really develop a definition and then this culture change. What really strikes me, Jen, about the work that you're doing is the opportunity not for the public to actually see the Good Pharma Scorecard, which is what Rob had mentioned, but to indicate to industry what are the key points that will build trust, because it raises the bar for everyone. And my point in talking about GSK and what we did there is that they were forefront for transparency and building trust that way. And now at Takeda, because of the corporate values and priorities, we're at the forefront of patient engagement. I would love to see raising the bar across all these parameters at the same time, and not having a company that's at the forefront for 1 or 2 things. And like, how do we raise the bar for everybody on the 5 key priorities, if this is in fact exactly what they are? And it may very well be, and we've talked about that. But I think that that's where we need to head. So we've gained some experience and we're improving transparency, thank you very much to the work that you've done and others as well. And I think that we're gaining traction, to your question, Jeremy, on patient engagement. It's really, and that's engaging with patients in the process. That's the trial design. It's improving diversity, because patient engagement and diversity really do go hand in hand. Designing trials that patients can participate in, whether they're from a different demographic or an underserved population. But I think that the next step is to make sure that we're addressing all these areas for each of the industry organizations, and not just prioritizing one. Then you don't look as good on another, and that's detrimental. Yeah.
Right. No, I mean, raising the bar in its totality for all players, all stakeholders, is obviously the goal. I want to throw this over to Briggs real quick. You've seen this from the world of the big pharma, and then certainly the agile entrepreneurial biotech world. What are the things that people don't know that are good happening perhaps within the walls of, again, industry? Stories that are untold, things that again, misconceptions, misperceptions about the industry. I mean, that fuels a lot of trust issues when people don't hear some of these good stories. Are there some that you could share?
Sure. So I think we go back to this concept of beneficence, and are we actually putting patient interests first? And I think, Jeremy, you had talked about that may actually be perfectly aligned with good business. So let's take the example of some of the rare disease companies. Rare disease companies, those of us who ever worked at Merck, were all indoctrinated with the famous Merck quotes. And there's a famous Merck quote from George Merck from 70 years ago in 1950. And he says, "We cannot step aside and say that we've achieved our goal by inventing a new drug or a new way by which to treat presently incurable diseases. We cannot rest till the way is found with our help to bring our finest achievements to everyone." And so this concept of, we're not just about doing trials and inventing drugs, we need to change patients' lives. And I think what's interesting in some of the small companies, particularly the rare disease companies, they know every single patient in America or in the world who has that rare disease, and they work tirelessly to make sure that that patient can actually does benefit from their medicine. Now you can say, well, that's good business, because the more patients that take their medicine, the better. But it's also, I think, exemplifies this beneficence of, we want to really care about that patient. We want to make sure that patient benefits from the innovation that we have developed. And I think that to me is one of the best practices of people really living that essence of putting the patient first.
Yeah. I mean, look, the tension between the perception of a profit industry and where its true heart and mission lies is a constant battle. I mean, from the world of media, I work for a for-profit entity, and so you could argue, okay, you try to put in you put mechanisms in place where people think, okay, you're here to give me fact-based journalism and great stories, but also certainly it's not a non-profit. We have to obviously we have competition. We want certainly our articles read. It is a very it's a nuanced situation, and when it's working right, as you note, Briggs, good business fueled by a good mission, it can help each other. If it's done not well, they hurt each other. So let me throw it over to Joe. In a similar vein, what's working in the life science industry that could be even better, and maybe what's not working that should be changed.
How long do I have? No, just kidding.
Each of these topics could be its own day-long seminar. I get it.
No, exactly. I do want to return to a point. I'll pick up on it, but that Jessica made, which is around sort of standard setting in industry and leading in one domain versus another, which is that, I think all of us have to take on the role of leaders within our individual sectors, because there is so much to be done, truly, not just in industry, big and small, not just in medical devices versus pharma, but even in academic research, nonprofit research. Like there are many ways that we all need to do better. And on research transparency and data sharing, I can tell you that it's actually been large companies that have led the way. And as an example, one of our we came into this at my group we began to understand the importance of this problem of selective publication and selective outcome reporting and issues, and how sort of incomplete dissemination of research distorted the evidence base that was available to clinicians and thus to patients when making decisions. We stumbled across this by doing studies, looking at registries of clinical trials, and realizing that somewhere between half and 2/3 get published when trials are completed, but it takes many, many years, and that means still 1/3 of research studies are never disseminated broadly to the to the rest of the community. This is just real incompleteness, right? If I were to say to you, we're going to do 3 studies, but only publish 1 in a year and 2 after 5 years, and the 3rd one we're just going to put on the shelf, you would say that's crazy. Like, what patient would agree to engage in that research? And so the first study we did showed low rates among industry, but the second study we did showed low rates of research dissemination among NIH funded studies, because it really is a problem across the entire research enterprise. It's a culture within research. And so the work that Jen is doing, originally more focused on big companies, but that was because only big companies were taking steps to address it, and to show the good companies versus the bad. And with voluntary efforts, with efforts that were spurred by legislation and requirements like FDAA, FDA Amendments Act, that now requires that any sponsor of a clinical trial of an FDA-regulated product has to register their study, has to report their results within 12 months of being finished. We are taking important steps forward. But also important steps forward have needed to be taken by the NIH and academia. We just recently, a couple of years ago, the NIH put similar policies into place requiring that all NIH-funded studies had to register, had to report the results within 12 months, regardless of whether they were studying an FDA-regulated product. And now NIH just very recently issued its data sharing requirement plan, where all NIH-funded research of a certain size, so big studies, had to have a plan for sharing their research data. Because, this is what we're learning is that there are individual companies, or maybe individual institutions, or probably more likely individual investigators within institutions, that are taking steps forward to promote research transparency, to report, ensure that all research is disseminated. But we have to work as a much broader field to address this issue.
Those are some good signs, though, that you mentioned. If the transparency ethos can build, it will, of course, again, as Jessica notes, raise the bar in several ways. Fred, not that you work in this industry, but you've again seen the troubles of humanity from many perspectives. As a journalist, I know, journalists, we all like to work in the field of analogies. Are there other industries that the life science industry could in some ways take a lesson from, whether it's around issues of trust, whether it's, you saw for a long time in the 90s, early 2000s, the tech industry was always the hottest thing, new, whether it's new cell phones, the internet, and it's not that those industries, those are for-profit industries as well. Are the communication dynamics the same? We also see legacy fossil fuel companies really embracing the future of renewables. We see industry in a lot of cases, retooling, understanding what needs to happen in society. I just wonder from your perspective, also working on this project in bioethics, are there some analogies we can draw upon for the life science industry in other fields?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's connected by this distrust in institutions, and a lot of it is, the sort of the behavior of the role of corporations in our society. I mean, we have, the Citizens United ruling opened up the floodgates of money in our political system, which means that money has, even more influence on how things are run. So big pharma and big oil and big tech, they're all using this this opportunity to make their to influence things, and there's a backlash to that. There's been a tendency in corporate governance to to elevate the responsibility to the shareholders above all else, to the exclusion of the rest of society. So, corporations have not run themselves as in a way that's civic minded. I mean, that's certainly true in all these other fields, and these energy and tech, they are having also big perception problems. Oil, I mean, oil industry wears a big black hat these days, even though, maybe they do good things. They invest in solar panels and the like. But they've suffered from the distrust toward big companies. The tech, I mean, tech has just gotten really big. And, not long ago, Silicon Valley was a bastion of entrepreneurialism. And that's no longer the case. Now, the role of an entrepreneur is to get bought by Facebook or Google or Amazon. And those companies are getting a big backlash. So this is really, it's a systemic problem, and it's alienating people from the good things that these companies do. I mean, we need these companies to do. We need the internet. We need medicine. We need oil, frankly, at least for the time being. But the other thing I think that's common is there's just a dehumanization that goes on. And you see this in these conspiracy theories about the deep state. People talk about the deep state. And well, what is the deep state? The deep state, as far as I can tell, are civil servants who work their butts off for low pay to do good. Like that's generally what the deep state is, And so, we have you guys who, I talk to a lot of people, science is kind of my thing. And I talk to a lot of scientists at big companies, and they're good people. They work hard. They want to do good, And I think that the more we can remind people that these are people we're talking about and not like evil empires, that might help. I don't know, but I can't solve this problem. It's above my pay grade.
That brings me to the moment at hand. I mean, and everyone in this chat, is this the perfect time? As horrible as it is, are we at a point now, where we can renew the commitment? We need this industry more than ever, obviously. And there's some questions are coming in on the chat, which I'll talk about in a second. But now is the time to shine. And so how do we make the most of that, of this, needed, the exigencies of this era call for the best collaboration, the most transparency, the most trust from patients, and never has there been more of the worried well than ever in memory, right? So are we at a moment when we could again leverage this so that people can trust in this industry, in this entity, in science in general? I'd like to think so, but I'd love to hear everyone's opinion in no specific order. You shout it out as they used to in my very loud Italian family.
So Jeremy, let me go first.
Yes.
I think it is an opportunity, but I will go back to the core mission of the industry is not just to invent medicines, but to improve human life. So my own personal view is, we remember when the Salk vaccine came out, the year before it came out, there were 35,000 cases of polio. Within 5 years, there were 100. Polio went away, showed the world that the science works. So I think the opportunity here is if in a year there are no more cases because the vaccines work and people haven't suffered adverse experiences but have benefited from it, I think that says a lot about what the industry can do to actually change the day-to-day life of people in the country.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, historic examples are great. It's the 100th anniversary of insulin, something that transformed diabetes from a death sentence to a manageable chronic disease. And as you note, I guess the proof is in the pudding. So here's the moment to shine. Rob, you said, that as you put it earlier, your industry hasn't done enough to gain trust. Can we leverage this moment, the urgency of this moment, to do that better?
I absolutely hope that we do. And you would think that the introduction of a highly effective vaccine would do exactly that. I think what I fear is that all of the research shows that a lot of people, maybe even the majority, are either vaccine deniers or vaccine anxious and are not going to get vaccinated. One would hope that as the vaccine is introduced, not everybody will have access initially because of supply, that people will see the experience in the patients that do get vaccinated and buy into this and get vaccinated themselves. Because as a society, we can't eradicate COVID if a lot of people don't get vaccinated. So I think this is an opportunity, and hopefully that it will generate that level of understanding what modern clinical research and drug development can do for society. But we've got a lot of work to do to make sure the vaccine gets adopted and used.
Well, that's one of the first questions that's appeared here. Like, if we talk about how lack of trust hurts innovation. Well, lack of trust right now, if what we hope bears out in this vaccine works and can get distributed, how can we make sure the public can trust it with this era of non-trust? So it's our first question that's come in. I'll throw it to the group. Jessica.
Yeah. So again, I think what we need to do is add in the patient engagement piece to help us design trials that are less burdensome for patients, and also that welcome a greater diversity of patients, whether that's through digital means now with COVID, digital technologies. It's like there are lots of tactics that help us to behave in a way that builds trust. Even the actual patient engagements, we can do many more virtually than we could do in person. And so what that means is that we're opening our doors to include patients in the process of drug development, getting insights and showing how the insights that we're gaining from the involvement of patients is actually translating into actions on the development of a new asset or a treatment or a vaccine that will better meet patient needs, either through the way we're conducting the trials or ultimately generating the evidence that patients need to make healthcare decisions. And we can show the involvement and the community involvement in a different way. So the reason why I was so attracted to move into patient engagement at Takeda is because the values of Takeda are aligned in a way that prioritizes, not just lists a series of value, but prioritizes PTRB, patient first, then trust, then reputation, and that drives business. And that informs every decision that we make. And that's why we're moving so quickly with patient engagement, because it directly aligns with these priorities in that order. That's an opportunity for us to move forward quickly, not waiting for evidence of the return on investment, because leadership believes that this is what we need to do and the focus that we need to have, which in turn is a win-win. We'll drive business if we're developing more medicines more expeditiously because patients are willing to participate in trials. And ultimately, it's a win-win for those we're trying to serve. And for Takeda and industry.
Those values are obviously essential for building trust, and never has it been more important right now to have that trust because of the era that we're in. You know, I know from where I sit in the world of science media, this era is the biggest, you know, for a science journalist, this is the biggest story of their careers in some ways. And I would think that for this industry, it is the most important moment in so many ways. And if we can leverage it for good and if out of it comes changes that will help this idea of trust, I would like to think that would be a tide to raise all ships. Joe, do you agree with me, or you want to fight me on that?
No, I absolutely agree with you. And I think one of the reasons that we can feel so trusting, or that we hope the public will be so trusting or more trusting of this, is the way everyone actually collaborated and worked together. I mean, within a month of the virus being identified, the scientists who sequenced it, shared their data immediately to allow every company to make use of that information. Every scientist across the world started sharing their research findings immediately through like preprint platforms like medRxiv and bioRxiv, right? And companies, right, started working immediately, directly together with scientists, with the NIH and other, global federal funders. Like this was a race together, not a race against one another. Some of the largest vaccines, right, are, huge amounts of public funding to support that work. Huge amount, even Moderna's vaccine, right, co-sponsored by NIAID. I mean, this has been a great example of when you bring everybody together, this should increase trust in the process. Everyone is working together to try to make this happen.
Yeah, well, that's amazing.
There's no reason this can't be a model for future collaboration development work, right? It doesn't have to be oppositional, right? Work can be collaborative.
Yeah,
totally agree.
That's well, one of the questions that came in for anyone. It's not directed at any specific panelist. Are we seeing a new spirit of collaboration in this era? And I also always think about, during HIV/AIDS, it's always talked about as an era in which, the policymakers, patient advocacy became an important player on the stage of the medical ecosystem. And now we're certainly in that era, we learned so much about viruses, a body of knowledge that I think has served us in good stead, so that this whole process has become a little more efficient, and we have to act as fast as possible. So, Briggs, are you seeing more just a collaborative ethos more now than say a year ago because of the events of the world?
I think the short answer is yes, and I think Joe summarized it incredibly well. I think across academia, government entities, corporations, big and small, they've all come together in a way that we really haven't seen recently, and it's been quite inspiring.
It's good to know. It certainly inspires, again, us tracking it, in the media. Jennifer, I'd love to hear your perspective on this. I mean, do you think there are ways to, track collaboration? I know when we were doing the Worldview scorecard, we kind of tried to see where there was more, international collaboration, whether it's citations in papers of people with different addresses. What is the collaborative spirit? Is that something that can be in any way reified through the kind of work you do in tracking this industry?
I mean, the answer is yes, you can track. If you just look at how many hands are involved in bringing a drug to market, you'll see it takes a village, right? Not a person, not a one company, as already discussed. Unfortunately, one of the challenges, the more hands that are involved, the more complicated the chain of responsibility can become. And so then it can become unclear who's responsible for doing what. But I just want to step back and say, I'm actually so surprised and inspired by the fact that this theme of human fraternity or social friendship has emerged, right, from our discussion of trust. And I think we are capturing a shift in what's going on right at the moment when, in some ways, the bonds between all of us have never been tenser or so fragile, right? Our national trade, it's so hard for countries to collaborate. It's so hard for people to collaborate, in families, Republicans versus Democrats. It's just very hard for us to be cohesive and friendly with everyone. And at this exact moment is when everyone's realizing how important this human fraternity and social friendship is, even in the context that we're talking about in drug development. And that being said, I saw this thread coming out in everything everyone said. Jessica was asking, is it good enough if one company scores well in one area? Wouldn't it be great if the company scored well in all areas? Well, you know what, Jessica? Yes, but isn't it great that that one company who's the leader can show what can be done and how to do it? Because in so many conversations, we see companies saying, that's not possible, we can't do it, or we don't know how to do it, and here's why. But what I've also seen is the one company that got it done first says, here's how we did it. And then another company will say, well, what about the contract? And they'll get into the specifics. But the leader shows it's possible. They did it went well, and here's how to do it. And so I think that's important. And in terms of what other industries have done, they know this too. You can think of the Mondavi family in wine, right? When Mondavi started in California, in that region of Napa, wasn't known for being very having good wine. And so Mondavi family knew it was important to invest in all the winemakers and lift up the region. And so I think that, why specific measures are important, I'm just so impressed by this theme of collaboration and human fraternity and the importance of working together and in friendship and get it right. And just to say, the Pope actually just wrote a whole letter about this, the importance of that social fraternity. I think it came out within the last few days. So it's just surprising that we all sort of are thinking about this.
Well, I think you've identified a major mission of what you do. When you see companies scoring high, it motivates other companies. I mean, this is the type of outcomes you want from friendly competition. Friendly competition can push us to be as creative as possible. Friendly competition, Lennon-McCartney. Let's keep trying to outdo each other in a good way to produce our best work. That is something that I think is essential. And I think what you do, and one of the questions coming in is how much is the public truly aware of the concept of bioethics? And I think again, we can delve into that too. We have about 4 more minutes left, so I'd love to get in anything else we haven't covered. But the fact that bioethics is something that is starting to percolate in the public's mind, it's something that's important to them. And I think hopefully as this industry comes out of this crisis and shows itself to be collaborative, to be transparent, to be strong, to be as necessary as ever to humanity, we can embrace this idea. The poet William Burroughs was quoted as saying, ethics will be the aesthetics of the future. And I think if we could maybe put down the worst aspects of, say, social media and our quick fix for a controversial headline and get back to what is the long-term goal of the human endeavor. And certainly what we cover at Scientific American, science in the service of humanity. How will it make us work, live, play better, more of an egalitarian distribution of healthcare? that is the end goal to me. And I think that is the most important thing about tracking this. You know, what our panel is about is how we could better codify what are the most essential ingredients to make health better and make this industry better. So final thoughts on that. Is bioethics going to be a topic that the public cares about more in the future? Jessica, do you have a sense of that?
I think that the public will care about the implications of bioethics. And that's probably all that's needed. I know that, Jen, you're onto something with what you're talking about here, and that weird intersection of how things are playing out. I think that that's, you know, as per usual, you have kind of that keen intuition of what really matters. When we talked about it, you know, collaboration, no one mentioned collaborating with patients in the patient community. That is a change for us in this industry. How to really do that, that is key to actually building trust with the public. So I would love to see more of this happen. I think that this is the path forward for building trust, and it's a combination of everything we've talked about: collaborating in the pre-competitive space, being more transparent, opening our doors, and actually incorporating patient perspectives in this ecosystem in a much different way, bringing it to the next new level.
Yeah.
And the time is right now, Jeremy, as you pointed out.
No, thank you. I want to just, again, since Rob is retired and is the voice of reason for the next generation of CMOs, do you feel the industry is on a good path, and do you think now is the time to leverage, you know, that path?
I do think the industry is on a good path, and I do think there has been positive progress. Whether that progress is fast enough or not, the distrust of the public suggests that it's not fast enough. So we need to be faster. And I would just remind my colleagues in the industry of a couple of things. We talked about the responsibility to the shareholder, and I believe in that. But I also believe that good ethics is always good business, and the right thing is always going to do well by you in terms of business. And the other thing I would remind them is, we have the privilege of getting up in the morning and working on improving human health. We're not selling socks in a supermarket. And that brings an obligation. For the right to get up in the morning feeling good about yourself because you're doing this, comes the obligation to do the right thing for the people that you're trying to help.
Yeah, that's a great sentiment to leave us with. Briggs, you want to final comment on the future of the industry, good or bad? Hopefully good.
I think it's fantastic. I think the industry is, the third component of trust is competence, which is just do what you said you're going to do. Make important medicines that are going to change people's lives. And I think innovation is doing that. And I think the future looks very bright as long as we can preserve this trust. There is one little quote that I just always remember someone saying: reputation is like fine china. Very, very hard to make, but can be fractured in an instant. And that's a little bit of the problem with our industry, is you have these one little fractures, and all of a sudden, all the wonderful work that Jen and Jessica and everybody has done gets fractured. And I hope that doesn't happen.
Well, it's a great quote, great line. Joe, final sentiments from you on the future of the industry, the medical ecosystem, and the science driving it.
Yeah, well, again, thanks for this great conversation, for having us all together. I think, what's most critical is that, we continue to pay attention to it. We're finally making progress, and that's reassuring. And there's some, great people leading the way, but, we've got to get everybody there, and we have to continue to pay attention to these issues, which is why it's so important that the scorecard is out there and ranking companies, and hopefully, we'll continue to broaden and expand so that our whole research enterprise can benefit from that scrutiny.
That's a nice nice way to put it. Jennifer, you get the benefit of the last comment.
I echo what everyone else said. I guess I would just say, China, following up on what Briggs said, China can break, but you can put the pieces together and make a beautiful mosaic. And so I guess I would just say, life is really messy. And while it's sometimes the principles are clear, how to apply them is not. And people may not agree on the right way forward all the time. Just even in vaccine development, right? in COVID, some of the research participants want to get out of the vaccine trials if there's an EUA for a certain vaccine because they want access to an active vaccine, not a placebo, right? And there's multiple competing goals and things are complex. But the extent that we can acknowledge where there are alignments of interest, where there are misalignments, and come together and come with concrete ways forward and measures and signal that we are moving together forward in a way that benefits humanity, I think there's always hope.
There is indeed always hope, and we need a lot of it. And I'm thankful we have experts like yourselves in this area to move things forward. I want to thank everyone for participating in this China shop of a discussion. I want to thank Jerusalem Ethics Forum, the Gallion Foundation, my dear friend Bruno Cohen for getting this together and getting us involved. And I wish everyone a wonderful day, a wonderful few weeks ahead. I certainly know it's some trying times out there, but I'm really happy to know we can collaborate better, and certainly there's a lot of optimism for the future. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to this great forum.
Thank you.
Jeremy.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.